Hello, I'm Dominique Pichard, the Chief Science Officer at rettsyndrome.org. I'm delighted to be able to share with you what we are working on and how we are continuing to drive the science forward for your loved ones with Rett syndrome. Over the last 20 years, there's been so much progress, from the identification of MECP2 as the gene responsible for Rett syndrome, to the start of the natural history study funded by the National Institutes of Health, to the first clinical trial. And the landscape has drastically changed over the last 20 years. So where are we today? Today, we have a phase 3 clinical trial. This is the last study needed before a company can go to the FDA to request approval of a drug, which would mean a drug would be available in the pharmacy or a hospital with a prescription. This is the first time in the history of Rett syndrome that we are able to talk about a day where we might be able to go to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription for Rett syndrome, not just for the many medical issues that Rett syndrome causes, but for Rett syndrome. We also have a pharma-sponsored phase 2 trial that just completed enrollment, for which we are waiting on results, as well as 2 additional non-pharma-sponsored trials. Many of you have heard that there are also 2 gene therapy trials in development, with an anticipated start time in the next 1 to 2 years. Now, I do want to put a caveat on this timeline because neither of these companies have yet gone to the FDA specifically asking permission for the clinical trial that they want to start, which means there may be changes to this timeline. There may be more things they need to do before the FDA provides permission for them to initiate a clinical trial. But there is hope now that in the next 1 to 2 years, 1 or 2 of these gene therapy companies will be able to bring a clinical trial for Rett syndrome. Not only has rettsyndrome.org invested in clinical trial development, but we've also changed the landscape by investing in the research that can impact your family now. Today, we have our first ever primary care guidelines. These guidelines are available on our website and available in the medical literature. These guidelines are so that the doctor or team of doctors that take care of your sons and daughters know the standard of care of a child or adult living with Rett syndrome to ensure optimal clinical care. Today, we have the first ever communication guidelines so that your son or daughter's team can develop a strong functional communication plan that allows your son or daughter to have a level of independence in how they interact with the world. So often, the world happens to our children, but a functional communication plan puts them in the driver's seat and lets them interact with their world in a much more meaningful way. We believe that transformative or curative therapies are in the future. We believe that there will be a day when we don't recognize Rett syndrome as we do today because the treatments have changed the course of the disorder. We're committed to funding innovation to bring solutions forward and to have the delivery mechanisms, clinical trial readiness in place to make these innovations a reality. In Rett syndrome, we as a community are very fortunate to have multiple groups investing in Rett syndrome biomedical research. This research is extraordinarily expensive, costing billions of dollars to make lab discoveries and actually bring them all the way through to the clinic. But Rett syndrome is now on the map. US government agencies such as the NIH and the Department of Defense, as well as international governments, are funding research in Rett syndrome. Our colleagues at Rett Syndrome Research Trust are funding work in Rett syndrome. Local Rett syndrome associations are also funding work in Rett syndrome. We need all of it, yet it's still not enough. I work closely with government agencies advocating for more funding in areas that will specifically benefit Rett syndrome. This year, I was invited to be a member of an NIH strategic plan working group that was charged with identifying key priorities for the National Institutes of Neurologic Disorders and Stroke to fund over the next 5 years. I had a seat at the table advocating for NIH to fund the type of work that Rett syndrome science needs to get us to the next level. I advocate on your behalf so our dollars can go further. But as I said, we need all of the funding. And each funding group has its own philosophies and priorities. So I'm here to share RettSyndrome.org's priorities. We invest in the solutions from the lab science that makes breakthrough discoveries to the clinic network that is needed to deliver those breakthrough discoveries. Both parts are critical to our joint mission of treatments and curative therapies for Rett syndrome. I am unwavering in my mission to excel in both areas. So how are we doing that? We're continuously scanning the neuroscience, brain, drug development, cell and gene therapy industries to identify science to fund. Science generated from known Rett syndrome researchers and science from other fields that stands to benefit Rett syndrome. Science that will move the field forward toward our mission of bringing treatments to your sons and daughters. We formed a scientific advisory board, and this group of world-renowned experts is guiding us in this plan. We are clear in our vision for funding science that happens in the labs. All strategies must be tied to identifying new treatment options, be it a therapy that allows your son or daughter to have an improved quality of life, or a therapy that has the potential to be transformative for your son or daughter in the future. This includes discoveries that identify a path to a treatment and ways to identify prospective drugs in those pathways, to testing those promising candidates in the animal models. We are here to de-risk the process so pharma and biotech will continue to engage and find Rett syndrome an attractive disorder to invest in. A not so unknown fact is that pharmaceutical companies want to invest in disorders where they will win. And clinical trial readiness is a huge part of that equation. So what are the components of clinical trial readiness? Clinical trial readiness means having a network of centers with enough expertise in the disorder to carry out a clinical trial and clinical research infrastructure to successfully conduct those clinical trials. Clinical trial readiness means having tools to measure success. In a clinical trial, outcome measures are biomarkers that indicate therapeutic improved how someone feels, functions, or survives. Clinical trial readiness means a patient community that is willing to participate in clinical trials. A good way to scare away pharmaceutical companies is to have clinical trials fail because not enough people enroll in the study and they have to close it down early. It's like sending a message to other pharmaceutical companies to run away, because for pharma, time equals money. The longer it takes to enroll for their clinical trial, the more money it costs. So you, the patient community, are a vital part of clinical trial readiness. So what are we at RettSyndrome.org doing to support clinical trial readiness? For the clinic network, we have a newly formed medical advisory board, which really formalized an informal network of physicians that have been advising us. And this medical advisory board is consisting of leaders in the field. They are guiding us in the process of developing Center of Excellence designations for Rett clinics meeting high standards we all want for the care of our loved ones. This group of centers of excellence will be ready to be the delivery mechanism of the great breakthroughs we are investing in. Next, those tools to measure the success, the outcome measures and the biomarkers. This will always be a work in progress. We do have tools today, but we need better tools. We're engaging researchers, pharmaceutical companies and biotech, the FDA, and families, all key stakeholders of the discussions. The tool used in the clinical trials will depend on what treatment is expected to do. And as we know, if you know one person with Rett syndrome, you only know one person with Rett syndrome. There's so much variability. And so the tool needs to be able to detect meaningful change through all this variability, which is no easy feat. But we are ready to tackle this. And lastly, the community. I hope you have had a chance to get to know our Rett Research Ready program. This tool is a natural strategic extension of our research investments. Rett Research Ready is a program to educate you, a parent or a caregiver of a girl or boy with Rett syndrome, so you feel empowered to make an educated, informed decision about whether participating in a clinical trial is right for you and your family. I was recently speaking with one of our Rett clinic directors, introducing her to the Rett Research Ready program, and she shared that this is one of the most powerful tools we could equip our families with. Vetted, accurate information about what clinical trials are, what it means to participate in clinical trials, and what to expect during and after a clinical trial. As well, it has a one-stop shop to see all of the clinical trials being conducted in the US, regardless of who is sponsoring the trial. This is a tool for all. And for those families who decide participating in a clinical trial is not for them, or families who have a son or daughter who's not eligible to participate in an active ongoing clinical trial, but they still want to contribute to the research, there are other research opportunities listed in the Rett Research Ready program that you can do from the comfort of your home. This includes surveys that researchers are conducting or studies that are conducted through telehealth visits. Everyone can contribute to the research if they want. Importantly, we are getting our community Rett Research Ready. At rettsyndrome.org, we're committed to growing clinical trial readiness in our entire community so that we are an attractive disorder to pharma and biotech, so that those breakthrough discoveries that are being made in the lab can turn into success stories. I hope that over the last 10 minutes, you've taken a trip with me that leaves you inspired and excited about the future in Rett syndrome. And you know what rettsyndrome.org is doing to move the needle. We are all in this together. We all do our small part to make a big difference. And together, as a unified community, we will advance towards a world without Rett syndrome.